How did they do it? Smythe believes they descended through the well C diagram, dropping the ramp stone into place behind them. He further contends that robbers probably used the well as a means of getting into the upper chambers. The ramp stone having been set in a bed of plaster, the robbers were forced to break through it, leaving a jagged opening. Mr. Duprey, an architect who has spent years investigating the pyramids, differs from Smythe, however, in that he believes the well itself to be a robber's hole, being the first successful attempt made to enter the upper chambers from the subterranean chamber, then the only open section of the pyramid. Mr. Duprey bases his conclusion upon the fact that the well is merely a rough hole and the grotto an irregular chamber, without any evidence of the architectural precision with which the remainder of the structure was erected. The diameter of the well also precludes the possibility of its having been dug downward. It must have been gouged out from below, and the grotto was necessary to supply air to the thieves. It is inconceivable that the pyramid builders would break one of their own ramp stones and leave its broken surface and a gaping hole in the side wall of their otherwise perfect gallery. If the well is a robber's hole, it may explain why the pyramid was empty when Caliph al-Ma'mun entered it and what happened to the missing coffer lid. A careful examination of the so-called unfinished subterranean chamber, which must have been the base of operations for the robbers, might disclose traces of their presence or show where they piled the rubble which must have accumulated as a result of their operations. While it is not entirely clear by what entrance the robbers reached the subterranean chamber, it is improbable that they used the descending passageway. There is a remarkable niche in the north wall of the Queen's Chamber which the Mohammedan guides glibly pronounce to be a shrine. The general shape of this niche, however, with its walls converging by a series of overlaps like those of the Grand Gallery, would indicate that originally it had been intended as a passageway. Efforts made to explore this niche have been non-productive, but Mr. Duprey believes an entrance to exist here through which, if the well did not exist at the time, the workmen made their exit from the pyramid after dropping the stone plugs into the ascending gallery. Biblical scholars have contributed a number of most extraordinary conceptions regarding the Great Pyramid. This ancient edifice has been identified by them as Joseph's granary despite its hopelessly inadequate capacity. As the tomb prepared for the unfortunate pharaoh of the Exodus who could not be buried there because his body was never recovered from the Red Sea. And finally as a perpetual confirmation of the infallibility of the numerous prophecies contained in the authorized version. The Sphinx. Although the Great Pyramid, as Ignatius Donnelly has demonstrated, is patterned after an antediluvian type of architecture, examples of which are to be found in nearly every part of the world, the Sphinx was typically Egyptian. The stele between its paws states the Sphinx is an image of the sun god, Harmachis, which was evidently made in the similitude of the pharaoh during whose reign it was chiseled. The statue was restored and completely excavated by Thames IV as the result of a vision in which the god had appeared and declared himself oppressed by the weight of the sand about his body. The broken beard of the Sphinx was discovered during excavations between the front paws. The steps leading up to the Sphinx and also the temple and altar between the paws are much later additions, probably Roman, for it is known that the Romans reconstructed many Egyptian antiquities. The shallow depression in the crown of the head, once thought to be the terminus of a closed-up passageway leading from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid, was merely intended to help support a headdress now missing. Metal rods have been driven into the Sphinx in a vain effort to discover chambers or passages within its body. The major part of the Sphinx is a single stone, but the front paws have been built up of smaller stones. The Sphinx is about 200 feet long, 70 feet high, and 38 feet wide across the shoulders. The main stone from which it was carved is believed by some to have been transported from distant quarries by methods unknown, while others assert it to be native rock, possibly an outcropping somewhat resembling the form into which it was later carved. The theory once advanced that both the pyramid and the Sphinx were built from artificial stones made on the spot has been abandoned. A careful analysis of the limestone shows it to be composed of small sea creatures called mummielites. The popular supposition that the Sphinx was the true portal of the Great Pyramid, while it survives with surprising tenacity, has never been substantiated. P. Christian presents this theory as follows, basing it in part upon the authority of Iamblichus. The Sphinx of Gias, says the author of the Traité des Mystes, serve as the entrance to the sacred subterranean chambers in which the trials of the initiate were undergone. This entrance, obstructed in our day by sands and rubbish, may still be traced between the four legs of the crouched colossus. It was formerly closed by a bronze gate whose secret spring could be operated only by the Magi. It was guarded by public respect, and a sort of religious fear maintained its inviolability better than armed protection would have done. In the belly of the Sphinx were cut out galleries leading to the subterranean part of the Great Pyramid. These galleries were so artfully crisscrossed along their course to the pyramid that in setting forth into the passage without a guide through this network, one ceaselessly and inevitably returned to the starting point. See Histoire de la Magie. Unfortunately, the bronze door referred to cannot be found, nor is there any evidence that it ever existed. The passing centuries have wrought many changes in the Colossus, however, and the original opening may have been closed. Nearly all students of the subject believe that subterranean chambers exist beneath the Great Pyramid. Robert Ballard writes, the priests of the pyramids of Lake Moors had their vast subterranean residences. It appears to me more than probable that those of Giza were similarly provided. And I may go further, out of these very caverns may have been excavated the limestone of which the pyramids were built. In the bowels of the limestone ridge on which the pyramids are built will yet be found, I feel convinced, ample information as to their uses. A good diamond drill with 200 or 300 feet of rods is what is wanted to test this, and the solidarity of the pyramids at the same time. See the solution of the pyramid problem. Insert. From Smythe's Life and Walk at the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid stands upon a limestone plateau at the base of which, according to ancient history, the Nile once flooded, thus supplying a method for the huge blocks used in its construction. Presuming that the capstone is originally in place, the pyramid is, according to John Taylor, in round figures 486 feet high. The base of each side is 764 feet long, and the entire structure covers a ground area of more than 13 acres. The Great Pyramid is the only one in the group at Giza, in fact, as far as known, the only one in Egypt, that has chambers within the actual body of the pyramid itself. For this reason it is said to refute the Lepsius law, which asserts that each of these structures is a monument raised over a subterranean chamber in which a ruler is entombed. The pyramid contains 4 chambers, which in the diagram are lettered K, H, F, and O. The King's Chamber K is an oblong apartment 39 feet long, 17 feet wide, and 19 feet high, disregarding fractional parts of a foot in each case, with a flat roof consisting of 9 great stones, the largest in the pyramid. Above the King's Chamber are 5 low compartments L, generally termed construction chambers. In the lowest of these the so-called hieroglyphs of the pharaoh Cheops are located. The roof of the 5th construction chamber is peaked. At the end of the King's Chamber opposite the entrance stands the famous sarcophagus, or coffre, and behind it is a shallow opening that was dug in the hope of discovering valuables. 2 air vents M, N passing through the entire body of the pyramid ventilate the King's Chamber. In itself this is sufficient to establish that the building was not intended for a tomb. Between the upper end of the Grand Gallery and the King's Chamber is a small antechamber H, its extreme length 9 feet, its extreme width 5 feet, and its extreme height 12 feet, with its walls grooved for purposes now unknown. In the groove nearest the Grand Gallery is a slab of stone in 2 sections, with a peculiar boss or knob protruding about an inch from the surface of the upper part facing the Grand Gallery. This stone does not reach to the floor of the antechamber, and those entering the King's Chamber must pass under the slab. From the King's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, 157 feet in length, 28 feet in height, 7 feet in width at its widest point and decreasing to 3 feet as a result of 7 converging overlaps, of the stones forming the walls, descends to a little above the level of the Queen's Chamber. Here a gallery E branches off, passing more than 100 feet back towards the center of the pyramid and opening into the Queen's Chamber F. The Queen's Chamber is 19 feet long, 17 feet wide, and 20 feet high. Its roof is peaked and composed of great slabs of stone. Air passages not shown lead from the Queen's Chamber, but these were not open originally. In the east wall of the Queen's chamber